Hi, my name is Dong Kim, and I'm a researcher at the Asia Pacific Foundation of Canada. And today I'm going to talk about my research on artificial intelligence policy in East Asia. Yeah, so during the past year and a half, I spent a lot of time studying policy documents and also speaking with policymakers, industry stakeholders, academics, and members of civil society in China, Japan, and South Korea to learn more about their government's effort to learn to govern artificial intelligence. So I put together the findings of that research into a report where I looked at government policies and artificial intelligence research and development and attempts for talent acquisition, and also issues about artificial intelligence, ethical, legal, and social implications in each of those three countries. And then I attempted to really draw out implications for the government of Canada and came up with a series of policy recommendations. So this presentation is largely based on that report, but instead of just sharing all of the little fine details that I found, I am going to focus on sharing some of the more interesting analytical conclusions that have come out of that research process. If you're interested in the full information, you can find the full copy of the report on our website. Okay. So what's really interesting about the attempt for AI governance in East Asia is that all of the three countries have come up with really comprehensive, far-reaching national strategies. So, of course, many other countries around the world have AI strategies, but oftentimes, like in Canada, they focus on promoting AI research and development. But in case of China, Japan, and South Korea, they have more detailed blueprints. They basically lay out a master plan for guiding how artificial intelligence is to be not just researched and developed, but also utilized in industry and in social services and military, public safety, etc., etc. So that's what's really interesting about the national AI strategies. And now I'm going to share some of the glimpses about what those national strategies entail, just to give you an idea of the scope and the comprehensiveness of those strategies. So this one is from the Next Generation Artificial Intelligence Plan from China. So the Chinese government has put together this plan emphasizing its ambition to be #1 in artificial intelligence by 2030. And one of the key points of this plan is that their AI industry is to grow from 150 billion RMB to 1 trillion RMB by 2030. So you see the scale over there. And so according to the plan, the size of the Chinese AI industry is to grow to 185 billion Canadian dollars, which is approximately a tenth of Canada's GDP today. So we really see how the Chinese government is prioritizing the AI industry, and it showcases their ambition in regards to this technology. And then we have Japan. So what's interesting about the Japanese approach is that the government has come up with a strategic council for artificial intelligence, which serves as a control tower that that coordinates policies between different ministries when they do work that is related to artificial intelligence, so that they don't overlap and waste resources. So the three key ministries that are involved in this process are the Ministry of Internal Communication, the Ministry of Education, Culture, Sports, Science, and Technology, and the Ministry of Economy, Trade, and Industry. So what they do is they have national research laboratories, and then they work closely with private sector partners, some companies that we may know, like Toyota or Mitsubishi. And basically the government brings them together and collaborates in pushing forward specific areas about AI-related research, such as natural language processing or application into future mobility. And this control tower allows the Japanese government to fully see what's happening in terms of AI, in terms of their push for AI agenda, and ensure that resources are not wasted. And then finally, let's turn to South Korea. The South Korean plan is called I-Korea 4.0. So what I wanted to highlight in the South Korean section is that the government has come up with a very comprehensive strategy on how AI and other intelligent technologies are to be used in order to promote different goals through the government. And within this strategy, we have 12 areas that are getting covered. So 6 of them are on industrial innovation. So some of the things that we may expect, like utilizing AI for promoting the use of autonomous vehicles, or using artificial intelligence in manufacturing or medicine and fintech. So those are more of themes that are familiar to us here in Canada. But also the government is indicating that AI is ought to be used for social welfare, provision of public service, ensuring public safety. So one of the remarkable goals that I saw in the strategy was that the Korean government is to use artificial intelligence and deploy systems that would allow the social services to provide more personalized care for Alzheimer's patients. And Alzheimer's today in Korea is seen as a very serious social issue. So here we see a more comprehensive approach to the use of artificial intelligence that's getting pushed forward by the government. So how do we make sense of it? Compared to North America, then what we see is that while in North America there is a division of roles between private and public sectors, in East Asia the line tends to be a little bit blurrier, and then the government tends to act more like a key facilitator that works very closely with the private sector and also bring together academia. So that's one difference. And then in North America, then, because the division between what the government and the private sector have to do are clearly defined, more clearly defined, there is a lot of emphasis on using soft law to govern artificial intelligence as opposed to coming up with hard laws. So the difference between soft and hard laws is that in case of soft laws, they refer to ethics guidelines or industry standards that emerge more organically among stakeholders, and hard laws are basically governments coming up with new laws, new regulations. So because the government is expected to dialogue with different sectors and approach it as a matter of governance as opposed to imposing policy, there is more emphasis on soft law in North America at the moment. And also because artificial intelligence is such a quickly transforming technology, there have been concerns that the hard law may not be able to be implemented quickly enough as to catch up with the technology. So that also adds to the trend of favoring soft law or putting more emphasis on it. But in case of East Asia, still governments see it regard artificial intelligence governance as something that has to be done by hard laws or government intervention. So in case of Japan and South Korea, they're not so much abandoning the idea of hard regulation. They're thinking about ways of coming up with creative regulations because they see government as the key facilitator. In case of China, the picture is a little bit murkier, but their policy is premised on the idea that the government is able to shut down any kind of operation that may compromise the public good. So it premises on the state being able to act with more capacity. And then finally, the different approach to the role of government in North America, the governments are expected to support basic research and innovation, and that's seen as being their role. But in case of East Asia, there is more focus on there is a more comprehensive focus. The government should support basic research and innovation, but also provide a blueprint as to how AI ought to be deployed, where to be deployed, etc., etc. One example is that all of the three East Asian countries, they emphasize the need to deploy artificial intelligence into manufacturing, because the government sees that all of the Japanese, Chinese, and Korean governments, they see that manufacturing is their current strength, and they want to maintain the competitiveness abroad by deploying artificial intelligence into the sector. So there is a wider scope for East Asia. And of course, these are very generalized and relative comparisons. And here in Canada, we see a lot of private and public partnerships. And also, the government of Canada has not abandoned the idea of regulating artificial intelligence. But I wanted to highlight the different approach between North America and East Asia. And another thing that I wanted to bring to your attention is how context in which this technology comes into actualization really matters. So here we have a table that brings together summarizes 4 different artificial intelligence ethics guidelines. I mentioned in the previous slide that there is a greater emphasis on soft laws because of the fact that technology is evolving quickly, while the policy or government regulations are not necessarily catching up to them. So ethics guidelines are being seen as a way for companies and governments to really say, okay, are we using this technology responsibly, or in a way that allows us to work with other people, other entities in in different parts of the world. So when we look at this table, we see some degree of convergence in terms of key values on technology. So for example, we see that Canada, China, and Japan, they all mention privacy as something that has to be respected. And also safety is a value that's mentioned in all 4 ethics declarations. The issue of responsibility is prominent as well, and also the idea that the technology has to be used in a way that's good for society is highlighted in these ethics guidelines. So in that sense, we see some degree of convergence of values surrounding the use of the technology. But let's think about it. China says that it cares about privacy, and is it true or is it not true? And the answer is a little bit nuanced. It's somewhere in between. But what we know for sure is that the idea of privacy in China is different from how privacy is understood in Canada. And also the social and political system promotes different ways in which citizens can claim the right to privacy. So what I wanted to highlight here is that with the proliferation of ethics guidelines, we might be tempted to just look at the text and say, okay, well, we're agreeing on these values, but now the hard work is really understanding how these values get played out within specific different social and political contexts, and how actual policy will be developed in order to ensure that differences are bridged and that different governments engage with each other in understanding their context a bit better, as opposed to just engaging with each other with false expectations that what's being declared on these ethics guidelines will provide all the information that's needed. So this really for me highlights that context in which the artificial intelligence technologies get deployed really matter. And so just looking at all of those AI strategies, one observation that I have is that artificial intelligence is really seen as a continuation of the nation building project that has been going on in Asia throughout the 20th century and even today. So here we have an image of Seoul from 1900, and to the right we have the image of Seoul today. So in less than 100 years, South Korea transformed from a pre-modern state into a vibrant modern economy. And what made it possible for South Korea and also Japan and China is the government coming in and playing a very strong role in promoting economic and social development. So in political science, there is a term called developmental state, referring specifically to states like South Korea, Singapore, and Japan, where a strong bureaucracy works very closely with the private sector in order to achieve a stated national goal, which most of the time ended up being GDP, but it also addressed social development. So because of that historical experience, the states in East Asia see themselves playing a stronger role in achieving objectives. And in this case, all of the three states, as it was intimated earlier in the presentation, artificial intelligence is a key part of their continued nation-building project, and that each government sees it that it's under their responsibility to guide it, to come up with a blueprint, to ensure that their goal is achieved. So I mentioned earlier that the Chinese government has stated the goal of becoming #1 in artificial intelligence by 2030. Similarly, South Korea has articulated the goal of becoming #4 in artificial intelligence by 2022. So these states, they see AI as being essential to their competitiveness abroad. It's the new GDP. So approaching artificial intelligence, it's going to be a national matter, not just an issue that gets delegated to the private sector. So that's one observation. And then another thing that I wanted to bring to your attention is the importance of culture in understanding how artificial intelligence is used. My hesitation in fully pursuing this area of research is that culture often becomes a tool that gets used to generalize what a group of people do. And that'll be wrong because there are so many different factors and that it requires more rigorous research and thinking. But I think it's worth mentioning that the difference in culture in which artificial intelligence gets deployed is something that we have to take into consideration, especially vis-a-vis Asia. Because I mentioned earlier the different attitude towards the state, the role of the state, and what the state ought to be doing definitely influences how they approach artificial intelligence. But also on the ground, how individual citizens engage with artificial intelligence and tools that have artificial intelligence integrated into them may be very different from the way in which we do things here in North America. That would be the case with most of the technologies, but more so with artificial intelligence. First of all, AI gets deployed into, it's not just a technology that gets siloed into one sector, like, for example, like the nuclear energy, but it's a technology that gets deployed into existing services and products and make them much more efficient, make them faster, etc., etc. So it's going to be more widespread and more omnipresent. But at the same time, if artificial intelligence is emulating what humans can do, then to reflect different culture. And also another thing that we need to keep in mind is that artificial intelligence is fueled by data, which is very political, which is very social, and also therefore very cultural. One anecdote that I could highlight is how when I was doing this research on artificial intelligence in Seoul, I asked one of the actually a lot of a lot of interviewees how they think about bias in AI, because the topic of bias in AI is very prominent in North America, where issues about racial discrimination and gender discrimination are very much highlighted. However, when I asked this question to the folks in South Korea, they were taken aback a little bit, and they asked, "What discrimination?" Because South Korea is more of a homogeneous society. The issue of discrimination does not come up to the surface as often as it does in North America. So that's why the question about AI and discrimination, data discrimination, came as a surprise for some of the interviewees, although it made sense to them eventually. It was new. So in that sense, we need to think how culture is not going to be the sole determinant, but we need to be aware that this could be playing a role, and we need to be aware of the cultural context in which the technology is getting deployed. And finally, I wanted to highlight the point about AI and geopolitics. So as I mentioned earlier, AI is being seen as a marker of international competitiveness for the three East Asian states. Especially the Chinese announcement that they wish to be #1 in AI by 2030 has caused a lot of anxiety around the world, especially in the United States. More and more, as China is becoming a superpower, Beijing is getting pitted as the enemy or the other of Washington, and that the two countries are being described as rivals against each other. And as AI is increasingly seen as a key driver of economic growth and also military prowess, it's becoming a theater of geopolitical competition. And as this technology becomes more omnipresent, there's going to be the need to come up with international consensus on how the technology is going to be used, what kind of values we agree upon, and also maintain channels of conversation in order to ensure that this technology does not lead us into a global catastrophe. However, as artificial intelligence is increasingly getting tied to the geopolitical, we might have a situation where the necessary conversations on AI regulation and policy at the international level may not be able to take place. And in this context, there is an opportunity for the government of Canada to really act as a middle power to not even bring the two parties together, but to serve as a bridge, to maintain a channel of conversation for regulating or for managing the emergence of this technology. Key takeaways that I would like to end this presentation with. First of all, AI is a very human technology, so the political, social, and the cultural context, they will matter. And second, East Asian states, they regard artificial intelligence as a key strategic technology that's going to be that's vital to their national interest. And however we engage with East Asia on AI, we'll have to take that into consideration. And finally, context matters. Again, this brings things together. We need to look beyond presumptions on the universality or neutrality of technology, and also look beyond what is just written or translated. We need to look at what's actually happening on the ground. What is the historical and what is the political context in which this technology is coming to life? And only then we'll have a clear understanding of how AI is getting used in different parts of the world, in this case, East Asia. So that's my presentation. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to it. And if you have any questions, please feel free to email me at dongwookim@asiapacific.ca. Thank you very much.